Good morning, church. How are we doing today? It's good to see everybody's faces. I haven't seen you since the holidays. I hope you had some good ones. But the year is begun, and the first month is almost over. And for this year, for the Denver church, if you're visiting with us, we're focusing on this concept of legacy. And the reason for that is manifold. We first of all want to make sure that as a church, we are adept and that we're purposeful, intentional at passing the faith down. We are increasingly living in a post-Christian world. And it's important that we don't take for granted the idea that what we believe is going to last. It is something that we have to be intentional about passing down to future generations. And not only if you have kids, but if you're a member here, what the Bible states, part of the narrative is that it's your job to make sure that you look at the youth and you look at the kids of the next generation and you make it your ambition to help pass the faith down to them. But that's not the only reason for doing a series on legacy. I think one thing that we want to do is make sure that we understand and are connected to our own legacy that we've inherited. This church here, this church hasn't always been here, right? People had to come here and start this church. That there were people who were benefiting the fruits of their labor. And I think it's important for us to understand that legacy and to stay connected to that. And then, lastly, we're in this series at the beginning of the year called Before I Die. And I realize now, a month into this, that this could be taken as a morbid way to begin the year. And that was not the intention, however. I think, at a certain point in your life, you use the phrase, when I grow up, I want to ... That phrase becomes inappropriate and weird at a certain point in your life. And you switch. You stop saying when I grow up. Instead, what you start saying is before I die, I want to ... And that's part of what we're doing is that, before we die, we want to leave a legacy. And there are concepts and there are principles that we have to follow in order to do that. Today's title is Before I Die, I Want to Live in the Moment. I think that many people envision or consider the concept of living in the moment as some romanticized scene of life captured and immortalized to prove that life has meaning. Now, this kind of rubbish, this is the kind of rubbish that somehow makes beautiful but vapid human beings somehow famous without anyone really knowing why. Beauty for the sake of beauty is meaningless. To me, living in the moment has nothing to do with the aesthetic or even the significance of a chosen time in life. Instead, I believe it has much more to do with what we choose to see and what we choose to acknowledge in every passing moment in life. And perhaps most importantly, the legacy we leave behind and how we responded to every moment that's presented to us. Now, I'm going to ask you to bear with me for a second because I need to wax poetic to express what I mean. And I'm going to literally end with the poem, so hang in there. Why in a given moment of joy or sorrow does a man or woman see God and his machinations, but another man or woman only see themselves or pure happenstance? Is the difference in that perspective completely self-serving or predetermined by what upbringing a person has been born within? And I think the answer to that is both yes and no. I believe that for the unexamined and self-unaware life, the reason behind occurrence is totally happenstance, determined by the whims of a perilously impressionable mind. But for the reasoned and for the examined, and for that reason sometimes tortured life, a person cannot help but see the presence of design. Cannot but help to see something divine in every moment of every day of all of existence. The fish rising, the sun setting, the mountains on fire with reflected snowlight, the laughter of children, the weathered skin of our aging beloved. Upon each moment that passes in our lives, the Spirit of God does hover. And we are either coming to life or slowly fading to shadow in each moment as we either choose to see or willfully ignoring this fact. Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. You have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you. Everyone is but a breath, even those who seem secure. Surely everyone goes around like a mere phantom. In vain they rush about, heaping up wealth without knowing whose it will finally be. But now, Lord, what do I look for? My hope is in you. This poem, Psalm 39, in it, David is doing more than acknowledging his mere mortality. What he wants is to live from moment to moment with clear perspective. He doesn't want to rush through life as a phantom that busies himself with tasks that ultimately amount to nothing. While he lives, he wants to correctly see and understand what each moment of life means. And that means he's going to look for God in each and every moment. And this is challenging for many reasons, not the least of which is that it's easy to forget what we are doing as time is passing. I mean, how many times have you arrived somewhere and completely forgotten the drive there? It's almost horrifying to think that you are operating almost a ton of machinery and steel at over 70 miles per hour, but cannot recall doing it. Now that is a trick of time. And the thing is about time is that there is no physical consequence of time. And by that what I mean is that time is not a force in and of itself. Time cannot be weighed, all right? It cannot even be observed in and of itself. When we say that we see time passing, what is really happening is that we are seeing the effect of objects moving through space for a certain duration of distance. Or we're seeing the effect of organic material degrading or reproducing through a given space. Time, in so many ways, is not actually a real thing. It's actually an invented device to help us understand our place in creation. The concept of time might be something wholly unique to humans, as a matter of fact, for there's no other aspect of creation that monitors time the way we do. The concept of time we symbolize. All right, that's the only way we can measure it, is if we symbolize it with numbers, with ticks, with tocks, and with measured rhythms. And it's not even something that comes naturally to us or easily to us. It takes children a certain level of maturity to understand the symbology of time. All right, to my daughter, okay, who's 5, 2 days and 2 weeks and 2 months are all about the same thing in her mind. Even 15 minutes is hard for her to understand what that means. Now, some of that is our fault because we use 15 minutes as the catch-all for everything we're not going to do right now, but we're going to do it soon. But when I say, hey, we're going to leave in 30 minutes, my daughter's like, well, how long is that? And I don't know how to answer that question because there's no way to measure it. I usually say it's 1 cartoon long. We're going to leave in 1 cartoon. When a Westerner, and we're all Westerners here, talks about time, it's interesting what they do with their hands without even thinking about it. They will point behind them when they're referencing the past. And they'll point ahead of them when they're talking about the future. They don't even think about it, they just do it. And when they're talking about the present, they point downwards. You know, that's our culture. There was an article that I read in Scientific America that was talking about the concept of time and how different cultures interpret it. And the Yupno people, which is a group of people in Papua New Guinea, their hand gestures have everything to do with geography. And so when they talk about the future, they point uphill, no matter where they're sitting. So if uphill is ahead of them, then that's the future. Or if it's behind them, that's the future. Downhill is the past. And that's how they think about time. But however we symbolize time, from the moment we reach and understand that symbology, we begin living within a culture that revolves around that symbolism. We often anticipate or we fear the future. We relish or we regret the past. And yet the reality is we're only living in the present. And I think the question we have to ask is, but are we? Or have we been tricked to attempt to do otherwise? James chapter 4, verse 13 says this, "Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them." Now, the context of this statement is important, especially to us, because it's addressed to people specifically like us. He's been addressing the wealthier members of the fellowship, those who have the leisure to consider the future, those who have the ability to make financial plans for the future. And that is us. No matter how much money you have or don't have in this room, it is you. And let me tell you why. Because you will say things like, I don't know how I will afford college for my kids in the future. Or you will say things like, I don't know what I'm going to do if my car breaks down. How will I afford to buy a new one in the future? You may even talk about how you're going to be able to pay the bills this month. This kind of discourse is different than most of the people in the history of the world whose scope of financial thinking and financial planning has largely had to do with whether or not they will get food for today. You may not be rich comparable to other people in this nation, but you are rich comparable to human history. And that is important so that you read the verse we just read correctly, because it's addressed specifically to people like you and me. Now, James is not denouncing financial planning or thinking about the future, okay? So those of you who hate planning and hate organization, this doesn't get you off the hook whatsoever. What he's doing is he's addressing a state of mind that begins to think that all plans and that all achievement of plans is something that rests in the will and the power of your own hands, as though God has no part in what you will have. It's a way of thinking about the future without appropriately putting God in his rightful place within that future, because that kind of thinking shapes the way we act in the present. If we give God his appropriate sovereignty within our future, then we see him and we recognize the spirit of his will in the present moment. So think about it this way. Let's say someone came to you and said, my dream is to walk to Europe. Okay, and people tell me I can't do it. I've had people my whole life tell me that's a stupid dream. And you don't really know how to handle it because you don't want to be one of those people. That say the dream is dumb. But what you want to say is, I feel like maybe you've not accounted for the ocean. And whether or not you've accounted for the ocean, you believe in the ocean, you think people are lying to you about its existence, that ocean is going to alter your plans to walk to Europe. All right? And their thinking about what they do today is going to largely be affected by whether or not they're accounting for that ocean in the future. All right? This is what James is addressing with people. We make plans and we have dreams and we have things that we want to achieve, but we're not considering the ocean, which is going to alter your plans and dreams. God exists in your plans and in your future and in your dreams, whether you've accounted for him or not. And the thing is, when the future becomes the present, if you've accounted for God in those plans, you react one way when that presence begins to affect your plans. But if you've not accounted for the ocean, you've not accounted for God, when you come across it, you're going to act a completely different way because you never thought about it. If God is not at the very center of your ambitions and at the very center of your plans, if he is on the periphery or barely hanging on to the edges of your ambitions, then I think you will find yourself bewildered and disappointed when the moment of the fruition of your schemes comes due. Because regardless of whether or not you've accounted for God in your plans, he will be in those plans. He is sovereign over those plans, and he dictates those plans. But will you see him when the moment comes? And that is the question. Are you still able to hear the small voice telling you in a moment to go share your faith? Telling you to go visit your neighbor? Telling you against all reason to go on a mission team? See, I see this mistake most commonly happen within our homes because we make plans for ourselves and we seek to attain our dreams. And sometimes we seek those dreams through our careers. And sometimes we seek those dreams through a relationship. And sometimes we try to attain our dreams through our children. And we have a vision for those plans and those dreams in our hearts. But they don't often happen the way that we want them to. And we react poorly as a result. We lash out in anger and frustration. We push harder for what we want. We push our kids harder for what we want. And often we're lashing out and pushing against God, who all the while had a different plan. And we don't see that because we never considered it to begin with. So we miss what God is doing in a given moment because we were too focused on what our plans were supposed to be. You know, Luke 10:38 says this: as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord replied, "you are worried and upset about many things. But few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her." This is a predictable verse, perhaps, but it's the perfect illustration. Martha had envisioned what things should look like and how things should go. And this wasn't even a vision of personal gain or personal glory for her. Things that actually needed to be done, she was planning for. These weren't like optional things. People had to eat, okay? And so she's making plans for things that really did need to get done. But it was her vision of how things needed to get done. And when it wasn't happening the way she thought it should happen, Martha reacted in such a way that betrayed the fact that she wasn't seeing God in the moment that she was in. You know, I brought a Jeep Wrangler back from, my mom gave me her old Jeep Wrangler when I went to visit her for Christmas. And I've been looking forward to this since I moved to Colorado. And so, you know, I brought it back home. The heat wasn't working when I brought it back home. And it was so nice while we were in the Midwest with the Jeep. It was like 60 degrees every day. And then the day we came home, it was like 20 degrees with 40 mile per hour gusting winds all across the Midwest, all the way to Colorado. So it wasn't as pleasant. But, you know, I started fixing the Jeep up. I put a new heat controller in, and it's never had back seats. It's just been totally bare stock. So I bought some back seats and seat belts, and I'm getting this thing ready for the summer. And this week, the back seat came in the mail, and so I'm looking forward to putting it in. And you know, in the back of the Jeep, there are these, 13 millimeter bolts that have been in there for 20 years that have never been taken out. And so I have to take those out so I can put the back seats in. And I'm so excited. I'm not really taking my time doing the job. And the bolts are stuck, so I get a PVC pipe as an extender on the ratchet. And it starts moving. I'm getting excited. And the first bolt head shears in half. All right, so I've got the head of the bolt, and the bolt is still in the hole. And so I'm like, okay, I bet I could probably fix that. And I move on to the next bolt right away without changing my behavior at all. And so, sure enough, 5 minutes later, I now have 2 bolt heads that have been sheared off and 2 bolts that are stuck in the hole. And so, I've never had to extract a bolt from a hole before, but I was like, I could figure this out. And so, I went and got the bolt extractors, and you drill holes in the bolts, and then you put the extractor. And the extractors, they told me it only works about 50% of the time, but I was positive for me. A man of God. It would work. And it did not. And I kept trying different ways, and so now it's a mess. Like the bolts are a mess. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to find a machinist or something. What I'm going to end up having to do is retap these bolt holes. It's just what was supposed to be a simple job is now turned into a perilous journey. And I remember, Megan had women's midweek that night, and the kids had teen devotional, and I was at home by myself, and I was just sitting in the dark when they got home. So discouraged about life. The idea that God might be trying to teach me something in this moment never crossed my mind. Even as I'm writing this sermon, never crossed my mind. I hated the idea that God was trying to teach me something in this moment, or there was some reason behind this, or I just wanted to be miserable. And I wanted to react miserably. And it shows how easy it is to not think about what's happening in the moment, to not consider what God is doing. And yes, this is a pretty insignificant example, but so is making dinner and wanting your sister to help you. But there are principles at work that are the same. And they're principles that determine our steps over and over again every day in both big and little moments. And they're principles that will determine your legacy. Do you see God or do you not see God? When we see God in a moment, we no longer are concerned with the good and the bad of what is happening from minute to minute. When we see God, instead, what we see is opportunity. We see an opportunity for the world to see him as well. I have a tortured relationship with coaching baseball. For the last 10 years, every summer I've coached one or two baseball teams, for my kids. And, baseball is the most emotionally traumatic sport there is. All right, there are two things that happen in baseball that make it emotionally traumatic, all right? One is that you get up to bat all by yourself. And if you're an excellent baseball player, you fail 66% of the time. All right? And for a child to get up at the plate with everybody watching you and some other child throwing a ball at you that may or may not hit you in the face, when your team needs you to get a hit in order to win the game and you strike out, that is a trauma. All right? The other one is when you are a pitcher and you are all alone on a mound and you are pitching and everybody's watching you, and if you're not pitching well, you can just start to see people under the, come on, Your team, which is like, come on, let's go. At the end of it, they're kind of like, hey, Chris, come on. Throw a strike, as though that would solve. Oh, throw a strike, okay. Okay, let me try that. And those two moments for a child in baseball are traumatic. And I realize that. I played baseball my whole life. And yet, when I coach my children, I have no compassion. Son, what are you doing? Why are you swinging like this? Look at your feet. Look at your feet. Get them square. Get your hands up. Hey. Sorry, Blue, hold on. Justy, get your hands up. We talked about this. Yes, I don't know what you're doing. And you want your child to do well. And here's the thing. In baseball, when your child does well, you are exultant. Because it proves how good of a father you are. It proves how strong your own DNA is. He would not have gotten that hit if it wasn't for this. And when they fail, you just want to go to everybody. It's not my fault. That's not my fault. I taught him, we've worked on this all day yesterday. He even cried. We were practicing so hard yesterday. So I don't know why he just did that. But when they fail, you are a failure as a father. And you just want to go, I don't know if he got any of my genes. It's all his mom's genes in there, obviously. And what you lose is that either in the moment of glory or in the moment of failure, what has happened is a moment to help him and everybody else understand who God is. And that's why the moment has come. When failure comes, it is the opportunity for them to understand something important about God. And when a moment of glory comes, it is an opportunity for them to understand something important about who God is. And in my experience, both glory and failure are effective instructors in this. You know, we just miss moments too much. We get focused on the wrong thing. There's a story a friend of mine told that I don't know if I believe or not, but I'm inclined to believe it because it's a good story. He's a minister in Wisconsin, and his name's Damon. And we were talking one time, and, you know, we were just talking about marriage and family, and, you know, my wife is a very strong, opinionated woman, educated at a woman's college, and she's got a lot of thoughts about a lot of stuff. And she has no hesitation in telling me any of those thoughts at any given moment. Probably more humble. Also, I'm very opinionated. And so my wife and I, we fight a lot, you know. We get into a lot of bumps, and we always make up, and we're passionate, and, you know, it might look hostile to some people, but to us, we're communicating. I'm in love with my wife still, as I know she's wrong, and I'm trying to explain it to her, you know. But I'm talking to Damon, and Damon has the gall to tell me this. Ivy and I have never gotten in a fight. I was like, what do you mean? Like, you've never hit her? Like, what do you mean? She's never hit you? What do you mean you've never gotten into a fight? We've never verbally fought before. Do you understand what I mean when I say a fight? He's like, we've never fought. I was like, Damon, how's that possible? And he goes, let me give you an illustration. So he had just moved to this small church in Wisconsin, and he had just taken over the church, and they had a Sunday service just like this, and after Sunday service, they had a leaders meeting, just like maybe you have today, or you have on the 9th, all right? And it was their first leaders meeting. And now Ivy, Damon's wife, is an artist. You know, she's a photographer, she's a painter, she's a singer, so the concept of time means nothing. And so Damon had told Ivy, like, hey, honey, listen, I know we got a lot going on, but here's the thing. It's our first leaders meeting, and I don't want to be late for the first leaders meeting that I'm leading for this church that we just took over. And so here's what I'm hoping we can do. And he goes, so I want to leave by this point, which means that you have to eat, and you have to change your clothes, you have to do all that by this point. He's kind of laying it out for her real gently, and, you know, he's not being condescending or anything. He's just like, he's like, this is kind of what, and she's like, sure, no problem. He's like, okay, I don't know if this is sinking in. And sure enough, you know, she starts running behind, and she doesn't get her stuff done in time. And by the time she comes out to the car, you know, he's kind of sitting there waiting for her in the car, and he's like, we were 10 minutes late for the leaders meeting. And I was like, oh, like for me, my dad ran a business college. The idea of being 10 minutes late for most people is like being an hour late for me. And so I was like, oh. I was like, Damon, what did you say? Were you mad? And he looked at me and he goes, no, I would never be mad at something. I would never let something like that steal my peace. And I was speechless because it was so wise, and it made so much sense, and yet it couldn't compute. like I couldn't take the leap there. I was like, so you didn't say anything? He's like, no, we just prayed together about the meeting, and I was like, wow. and the reality is that he sees God in a moment. Being late is not the point. being a good man while we're being late is the point. Being what God wants me to be in this moment that has presented itself to me, that's the point. That's why this moment has come. My whole conversation about not being late and trying to get her to be on time and then her not being on time has led to this moment where I have the opportunity to show that God is sovereign in every moment of my life. And if we cannot see God in the small moments of life giving us what is unexpected, like a broken bolt hole, like a lost baseball game, like dinners where your siblings won't help you work, then how will you see God in the moments of true import when things do not go your way? Do you torture yourself because your life is not the way you want it to be? Do you exasperate your family and your children because they are not being what you want them to be? Are you considering the future and the schemes that you have and putting God at the very center of those plans? Your ability to live in the moment is not a product of your tolerance for spontaneity or your desire for adventure. It is instead correlated to your willingness to factor God into your own plans and your willingness to see him and seek him as those plans are unfolding, either the way that you want them to or the way you never intended them to. The legacy you leave will be, after all, only a collection of moments and how you chose to respond to those moments. So leave a good legacy. See your God and live in the moment. Amen. Thank you.